Today, we use Tanium to analyze the impact of lateral traversal with Windows credentials. Welcome back to Tanium Tech Talks. I'm your host, Ashley McGlone. I have literally been waiting years to do this episode. Everything has finally lined up, and I can't wait for you to see it. So let's talk about impact for a second. All right. Good impact. That's your annual performance review showing your impact, right? Good impact. Hey, when your drill's not enough, you need that impact driver, right? Impact, right? But bad impact is lateral movement when somebody has toasted your environment and they've got credentials and they are just running from one machine to the next. That's bad impact, which brings me to the shirt I'm wearing today. I'm with Pwned. That's right. I'm with Pwned. So that's the problem that we're solving. And now help me welcome back to the show Josh Bryant. Josh has been with us before. So Josh, for those who haven't met you yet, please introduce yourself.
Thanks, Ashley. Like you said, I'm Josh Bryant. I am a director of product management here at Tanium, and I'm actually one of the inventors and patent holders for Impact. So I'm very excited to finally be on here talking about it as well. You had asked for a little background before we started here. So I have been doing this for over 26 years, and prior to coming to Tanium, I was a cybersecurity architect at Microsoft. And building a product that does this has actually been a dream of mine for a long time. And back in 2019, I linked up with Stefan Mols, another Tanium employee out of Germany, and we put our minds together and sat down and created what is now Impact. And we finally brought it to market in early, or actually mid 2020. So it's been out almost 5 years now, and we are finally making some long awaited improvements to the product that I'm really excited to show you today.
Speaking of credentials, wow, that's a big drop right there. So you've got the background, you've got the patent, you're the inventor. It sounds like you're the right guy to give us this tour today, Josh. So I'm glad you're here. And I think our audience is probably thinking, oh, this is going to be good. I'm thinking the same thing. I'm really eager to see this too. So you're right. This has been around for a while. So I know this is, like I said, the first show we've done on Impact. We've been waiting for a long time to get this out. So why don't you just start with the basic overview, just from what is the problem we're solving with this module?
Yeah, we've been waiting so long. I think that my beard might have actually caught up to yours finally.
Oh no, yeah, that's a pretty good. Yeah, looking good, man.
Let's dive in though. So now the module was designed to proactively analyze lateral movement potential that exists in your environment. We wanted to help customers visualize, contextualize, and prioritize remediation of lateral movement before it becomes a problem. Because every single breach or compromise that happens includes a lateral movement component in the attack chain. So once an adversary lands inside the environment, they immediately start looking for where else they can spread because they never land on their intended target. They always have to move around to get to their end goal, whether that is ransomware, in which case they're trying to spread through as many endpoints as possible to have the maximum impact to the environment to get you to pay that ransom, or if they're doing something a little bit more subtle, maybe intellectual property theft or some sort of espionage. They're going to move about until they reach their end goal. And what we've done here is show you where those possibilities exist so that you can minimize the impact if and when a breach occurs. So we'll show you a lot of different data here, and it can sometimes be a little overwhelming, but hopefully it'll make sense to you as we look through it. So up the top here, you're going to see a bunch of different metrics. Now, very important note you'll see here, we're only showing you data for Tanium managed endpoints, and specifically only those that are domain joined Windows endpoints. Those are the most prevalent in our customer environments. We would like to expand beyond that eventually, but today That's our limitation. So
Yeah,
we
that's
showed
a good point to mention. Several shows ago, we did an episode on SSH Snake and some content that's out there to help if you're on a Unix platform or Linux platform. So go check out that episode. I'll put a link in the show notes if you're on the Unix or Linux side of the house. But this is a primarily a Windows today.
correct. And the problem isn't limited to Windows, and we do want to include content like the SSH Snake that you just mentioned into Impact eventually. We don't have it there yet. So today, just keep in mind your domain join Windows endpoints. So we're going to show you the total number that we have under analysis, the number of users that we've analyzed, and the number of groups that we've analyzed. And then you're going to see the breakdown of the impact rating for everything. So the higher the rating, the more lateral movement risk exists in the environment. If you are at a critical, that's telling me that greater than 75% of the environment could be reached through lateral movement techniques such as pass a hash, pass a ticket, etc., using tools like Mimikatz, or what a lot of folks are familiar with, to steal the credentials and then begin to use those techniques and move about the environment. So always remember, the higher the impact rating, the more lateral movement risk exists. So you really want to see these numbers shift towards the right. The more you have towards the low end of the spectrum, the less impact potential there is in the event of a breach. Now, we made some very recent improvements in our latest release. We have kind of changed the look and feel here a little bit. This used to be split up into three sections, and you had to do a lot of scrolling. We've combined it into this findings view that you see here now. So you can switch between looking at your users that have been analyzed, your groups, or your endpoints. And you notice as I switch through these, our summary changes. It looks very similar to the metrics we just described at the top, but you're going to see some details that are more scoped to whichever asset type you are interested in or looking at now.
So I've got
So
a question.
yeah,
When you talk about doing the analysis, what does that mean? Because we're kind of slicing, from what I'm guessing here, so findings, we're slicing the findings by users, by groups, by endpoints, but how did we get those findings? What did we do?
so we have several different sensors that come with the product that run on endpoints, and we harvest the results. We cache them in the Tanium data service, and then every 24 hours by default, Impact asks the Tanium data service for that data, says, show me all these sensor results. And then we do some analysis and some calculations on it. We build a graph in memory, and then we analyze the relationships between all the nodes in the graph. We'll base that on our control, represented by your direct and indirect control columns here. So this tells us, in the case of an endpoint, how many users, so if we go down here, we see one user or group, have control over this endpoint, meaning they have admin privileges. They're a member of the local admin group. And then indirect tells us the additional count of users that have control over the endpoint based on their group membership. So they are a member of one or more groups. We're doing recursive analysis. So we are recursively enumerating every group that we have witnessed from the sensor results as being in the local admin group to show you who truly has control over the endpoint. And the other half of the equation is what we see in the sessions column here. So when I talk about sessions, I mean any login type that exposes credentials in a way that they can be stolen with tools such as Mimikatz and used for lateral movement techniques such as pass the hash or pass the ticket. So that's basically any login type other than network introduces that type of exposure or risk. So I've logged in directly sitting at the console. I have a remote desktop session. I'm done a run as, I'm running as a service, running as a batch, etc. Any of those, we're measuring that. And then we are also synchronizing some data from Active Directory to resolve the results from our sensors and combining that and again building that graph and then doing some calculations up front. So we are measuring with our inbound and outbound columns here. Inbound, how many users and groups can get to this endpoint. Outbound, think of where can I go from here. So if I had some indication that this endpoint was compromised, what does that really mean? And here it's showing me that from this starting point, I could use those lateral movement techniques to compromise a combined total of 101 users or endpoints in this case.
So to recap for, because I know we have people who are getting started in this industry, and I know we're using a lot of language that presumes you're already in the space. So number one, these numbers are not, from if I'm hearing you correctly, they're not machines that are already compromised, but
Correct.
it's the accounts and the like domain admins is on all your machines. That's a bad idea, right? So if we've got what accounts are given permissions on these endpoints, and if those credentials were popped, compromised, then I could use those same credentials from that machine in memory. I scrape those out, and then I could take them to all the other machines where that account also has access. Is that the kind of the general vibe there?
Exactly. So we are showing you where the conditions exist that would allow that to happen. So again, the idea is to show you this so you can address it before it happens. So you have more control and you're less likely to end up in the news in the case of a breach, right? Because if an attacker lands on, let's say, this top endpoint here, we see the outbound is 0. That means there's no lateral movement potential from this starting point, and we can easily remediate it. So, you may be as simple as re-imaging the machine. You may do some additional forensic analysis and things before doing that. A lot of different things that you would do in that scenario, but you can very quickly see that it is unlikely, at least using credential theft based techniques, that an adversary was able to move beyond this endpoint. In contrast to the one here in this row, we can see that if this was compromised, we could move laterally to 101 endpoints. And we make this a little easy for you with some integrations that we have with Tanium Threat Response. You can apply these same concepts even if you don't use threat response or if you have other security tools that provide alerts. Let's say for user-based compromise, right? Tanium is endpoint focused. We're going to show you when compromise occurs on an endpoint, not so much if it comes through users. So let's say you get a report or an alert saying that your account was phished. So we know it's compromised. Somebody has your credentials. We can go into impact and see what that means. But in threat response for endpoint-based compromise, we have the ability to look at it in our alerts here. Every alert represents potential compromise in the environment. I need to triage it and see, is this false positive or benign, or is this real malicious activity that I need to look at further? And
Oh,
the
I have to just have to say this is nice. I don't know why I've never noticed. How long has that been in threat response?
5 years.
Oh, okay, that's on me then. I should have known this already.
This is
So
the
that
very
that's
first
good.
integration for Impact. So very first product at launch that we
All
had
right.
was with
Yeah,
Threat.
somehow I missed that at launch, but I'm guessing some of our viewers are like, "Oh, I didn't know that either." So yeah, that's what that number is. Okay, so
Yeah,
we've taken impact data and threaded it right there beside the
right. So
alerts.
this tells
Fantastic.
me at a glance, and it's giving me the ability to help prioritize my triage processes as well. That if this alert is real compromise, where can I go from here? So we're showing the outbound data here, and then a combined total of 101 users and endpoints could be reached through lateral movement techniques from this starting point where we've received an alert. And if we look at the alert details, we'll also actually just click on here. We see the impact details. And we see some of the same data that is in impact because we're pulling it directly from there. And we can pivot directly to it to get a better idea. So I can just click Explore and Impact. That's going to pop up a new tab. And now we're looking at the outbound details for this endpoint. And we can see, so we've got a summary visualization at the top, follow the direction of the arrows. starting from this endpoint, there's one user that has a session on it, so that's our exposure. That user is in a combined total of 5 groups, and this combination allows them control over 20 endpoints. From these 20 endpoints, we can steal the credentials of 2 users. Those 2 users are in one group, and this combination gets us to an additional 77 endpoints. And from those 77 endpoints, we can get one more user and 3 groups, and that's kind of the end of it there.
All right. So again, for people who are just new to this, when you say that those users and groups can get to those endpoints, does that mean that those are user accounts or group accounts that are in the local administrators group on those other Windows boxes?
Correct. So in our first hop to this one user and these 5 groups, so we go, it's exposure control is basically how you follow it, right? So this user is exposed because they have an active session. So this is our one session we see here on this endpoint. And so if this endpoint is compromised, that means that I do some privilege escalation. Let's say I've obtained system level access on this endpoint. I can now steal the credentials of this one user. And we can see who that one user is by switching over to our session view. And we see the user Ed Jacobs' service count here is who has the session on it. But if I go back here, and I want to see, what can they reach? Our details behind everything are down in the grid below. So just like on our overview page, we're split into different sections. So if I wanted to see how could I move from this endpoint and gain control over the Ralph Hart account, for example, I click the target icon, and this shows our shortest path graph. So again, we're going to follow the direction of the arrows. We see starting from EDR WN 2517. We can steal the credentials of Ed Jacobs. Ed Jacobs is a member of the EDR admins group, which gives him admin privileges on EDR WN 2516. So this means the user has sufficient privileges on this endpoint to carry out those lateral movement and credential theft techniques. And then from this endpoint, the Ralph Hart user has exposed their credentials by virtue of having a session on the endpoint. And that's how we can get from our starting point to this user of interest. Or we could look at it from the endpoint point of view. We can pick any one of these. I'm going to look at the one of the ones that's furthest away. Let's say this one. And you see our graph change. This is how we can get from A to B. And each one of these relationships gives us an information that allows us to make an informed decision as far as remediations are concerned. So,
I just gotta interrupt right here. This view is amazing. Now, is that part of the new updates, or was that always
no,
there?
no, this
Okay.
shortest path graph has been there since release. The new update provides the tabbed findings view here instead of having to scroll down through everything, and it also adds these filters. So we didn't have this before. Any column that you see here, in addition to a couple of optional columns that are not shown by default, you can create a filter for. So if I only wanted to see well, we only have one domain in the demo environment here, but let's say I only wanted to see assets where the domain name is equal to demo.tanium.local. I could do that. And then if I wanted to filter further, I can add another condition. Let's say only show me where our sessions are greater than 0. And now that's going to filter the results even further. So you've got a lot of
Nice.
flexibility everywhere you're at to look at what interests you most. And then back to what I was starting to say here about, giving you enough information to make informed decisions on remediation. Every customer environment is unique. So you kind of got to come in and look at this. Uh, if this was a customer environment, I couldn't tell you if whether or not Ed Jacobs is supposed to be a member of the EDR admins group. But customer would know, right? They know their environment. So they could make that determination. And if the answer is no, I could sever this relationship by removing Ed Jacobs from this group which removes his admin privileges on this endpoint. So basically, everything from this point on over to the right, that path no longer exists. We've reduced the lateral movement potential by making that one simple change. We could take that for any one of the relationships that exist. So that was a good example for member. For the admin relationship, we could say, is this EDR admin group supposed to grant admin privileges on this endpoint? Now, based on the name, the answer is probably yes. So we would say, no, this not, it's intended, we shouldn't remove this relationship. But if the answer was yes, and they're not supposed to be there, we could say remove this group from the local admins on this endpoint. And again, we've severed the relationship from everything here on out. For our sessions, we still have opportunities to disrupt the path there as well. So we can ask ourselves the question, should the Betty Stokes account be allowed to log into this endpoint? If the answer is no, we could implement policies, and we could even use Tanium Enforce to do this for denying login. So we could deny every type of login for Betty Stokes on this endpoint, which will prevent them from logging in. And if they can't log in, they can't expose their credentials. There's no session that will exist on that endpoint anymore. So again, we've severed the relationship from this point on, following the direction of the arrows. And the next time our analysis runs, which is every 24 hours by default, but it is configurable. You can run it more frequently if desired. Uh, all of this data will update. You'll see the inbound and outbound numbers change. And if you were to come back in and look at this view here, these relationships wouldn't exist anymore, right? So our
So,
impact.
question there. So, if we did do some remediation, this comes down to basic group hygiene, right? I remember when I was at Microsoft doing Active Directory risk assessments all over the US, there's all these problems with group hygiene that every company's got this problem, or
Yep.
they'd never bother to go clean up groups and access, right? We've all seen it. So, I go in, I actually take the time to clean up those groups. How long is it before I see those results in the UI here?
Every 24 hours by default. So as I mentioned, it is configurable. That was a safe default to give, but we can look at our schedule. So there's actually two different places, and I think this is a good opportunity to mention criticality as well. So this column down here that we've seen in a few different places, this is intended to tell us how important the asset is in the environment. So you can assign a criticality level ranging from low, medium, high, all the way up to critical, and we can do it for endpoints, users, or groups. So it tells me at a glance how important is this endpoint, user, or group to my organization. And we have some default rules because there are some things that are important to everybody, no matter what, for what we're doing here at least, right? So we know, or you know, that a domain controller is a high value target. If I compromise a domain controller, it's kind of game over, right? I have control of everything in the environment. So there is a default rule that will mark all domain controllers as critical. Similarly, with our users and groups, we have a default rule for highly privileged groups in Active Directory. Now, because those are all a well-known SID, they have the same RID at the end, we just use that, right? So it avoids any issues with localization because administrator is different in Spanish and French and whatnot than it is in English. So if we just use the SID like we have here, or the end of it, the RID, we can have everything and have it work across every single customer environment. So these are things like domain admins, enterprise admins, schema admins, all the highly privileged groups in AD, we automatically mark them as critical. But our data that we synchronize from AD and at some point in the future from Entra ID as well happens through a schedule in criticality. So we go to our user group schedule, and this shows us the looks like we've had some failures recently in this environment, but it shows us when the sync last ran and what the results were, how many users, groups, and endpoints we synchronized from it. But in here, we can change the settings. So our default actually has been changed here. It's midnight UTC. If I'm remembering correctly, it's been changed to 7 a.m. UTC here, but you have a lot of flexibility. So it's once per day currently, but you can look at the schedule and see how long does it normally take this process to run. Here it's every 48 minutes, so I could safely synchronize every hour. You just don't want it to run over the top of itself. There's a sec.
There's another question I've got here. Just we're kind of working backwards into how do I set this up to begin with, right?
Almost.
So where do I go? Is this the domains? Because we're talking about shared services. This is stuff that works across all the modules in Tanium if they choose to implement it. We're
Correct.
looking at criticality. Benchmark uses that also. So there's the domain, the directory query service here, and so that's where I wanted
Here's
to get
where we
to.
do our initial configuration.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Where do we go to set it up to begin with? Yeah.
Yeah. So here, we just add our domain, right? So you can give it a friendly name that's just for this column here. You choose the LDAP server, that's going to be your domain controller. For cloud customers, TLS is mandatory. You'll choose a Windows endpoint as a satellite. So that'll kind of proxy the connection for our cloud customers. We ask the satellite endpoint to make the LDAPs or secure LDAP um, communication channel to the domain controller. And then we retrieve the data that we need from AD. So criticality basically says, hey, directory query, for every single domain that you have configured, tell me all this information, specific set of attributes for every user group and computer object in the directory. And then that's what happens in that synchronization process that we were just talking about.
Before we leave that, I want to, because we've never really talked about this directory query service on the show. This is a good place to point out. So, if you're an on prem customer with an on prem instance of Tanium, you've got your own hardware, virtual servers, whatever, right there, then those servers would be querying another LAN connected domain controller to get this information. But I want to make sure that cloud customers understand if you're in the cloud and you have on-prem domain controllers, then you would use one of these satellites to then, so the cloud talks to the satellite, which talks to the domain controller to get this data so that then we can bring it back for that analysis to say, okay, this user's in this group and this group and this group, and it does the hops then. So this is kind of like a virtual mapping.
Correct. And for on-prem, you have the option of this synchronization process and the connection happening either directly from your module server, or you can use a satellite on-prem as well. So if the domain controller that you need to get data from is in another network segment and you don't have direct line of sight between your module server and that domain controller, you can configure a satellite for that to happen, and it'll go through your proxy and everything like that. For cloud customers, satellite's mandatory because we used to we changed it luckily a few years ago. The initial before the existence of satellite functionality in the platform, you had to poke a hole in the firewall and create some very specific rules from cloud to on-prem, and it was not good, right? So it's much easier, much safer to use with the new satellite functionality, where you just select a any Windows endpoint with Tanium client on it, configure it as a satellite, and then it's available for selection here. So you'll see your list of satellites. The ones that are grayed out are non-Windows. For directory query, we only support Windows satellites, so your Linux ones will be grayed out here. But yeah, that's how we get our data
And
safely and
it's worth, yeah, it's also worth pointing out that those satellites have, we don't need to talk about the details, but basically they have super special secret handling abilities to make sure that this is protected and encrypted.
yes, everything is encrypted end to end, every bit of the communication channel here. Other thing I should point out here before we move away from it, we do certificate pinning. So I don't know if, let's see, it should load here. The certificate details will populate. We have some guidance in our documentation on how to verify the certificate thumbprint. So you know that I really did connect to my domain controller and there wasn't some man in the middle thing happening there. And once you've done that, there's a validation function so we can make sure that everything works. But the credentials that you provide here, we only need a standard user account, completely unprivileged. They don't need any special permissions in AD. So a default user that is a member of nothing other than domain users has enough privileges to read the objects and the attributes that we need for analysis. So you're not needing any special privileges to
We have seen some customers though that had some privileged accounts they removed just everyday read access from. I think we've seen that a few places.
We have. It's only been
Yeah.
about two or three customers. It's very
Mhm.
uncommon. If you have done some non-standard things in your AD environment with the permissions, we do have it outlined in our documentation. The read only, so again, there are no write or change permissions necessary. The read only permissions that are required for us to successfully synchronize the objects that we need for analysis. So you can keep doing those things for whatever reason you've done them for. As long as you add the permissions that we need, we'll still be able to do things successfully.
Recap for our viewers. We've kind of worked backwards into the setup, right? So we showed you what it is, how to get there. So this is all in the docs as well. We'll have that linked in the show notes below. So I'm going to go into the directory query shared service,
Mhm.
configure my directory access. And actually, before that step, I'd probably need to make sure I've got a good satellite, a Windows based satellite. Then I go into configure directory query. Then I go into criticality shared service and define
Yeah.
what
We
are
optionally
my
go into criticality.
optionally.
Highly
Yeah.
recommend it, but
It's
they
recommended. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And so then once I've got those two things configured, when I go into impact, everything just lights up automatically. Or is there anything else I need to do in impact for configuration?
Nothing that you need to do in Impact. So really, once you've configured the domains in directory query, if you did nothing else, within 24 hours, you'll see data populated in Impact. If you're impatient, you don't want to wait 24 hours after configuring those domains. Come in here, we'll do a criticality sync first. So we come into our schedule and you see this start sync button. I just click that and it'll start the sync process. It'll pull in all of the users, groups, and endpoints and the attributes that we need from them from your configured domains. And then once that completes, we go back into Impact. Right thing here. Yep. And there's synchronization here as well. So hit the collect and analyze. Actually, this runs very quick here. I'll just go ahead and click it. You'll see status. It's going to tell you what it's doing. So first thing it does, we mentioned earlier in the show, is it's getting our sensor results from the Tanium data service and cache there. Then we resolve group membership, and this is taking the data that we pulled from TDS and then comparing it to what we've synchronized into criticality. So the security identifiers that we got in our sensor results, what users, groups, and endpoints do they match? And then any assets that we don't see anymore from these results, we delete the stale assets that are no longer relevant. So we're doing a rolling 72-hour analysis here, right? We want to show you what was possible within recent past. And then we build our graph. We determine what can be reached from where, build all the data that we're doing, and then we update the impact scores and the impact rating that you see across the module. And so all you have to do if you want to see things immediately after configuring is run both those synchronizations. And once those are complete, you'll see this populated here. If those things haven't run, you're just going to see unresolved, and you'll have a little warning up at the top saying that, hey, you need to make sure that you configured the domain and run the synchronization.
So at a glance, then this metrics bar across the top is if I'm a new customer or maybe I'm doing a proof of concept and I come in and I see a big number in the red critical, that's my red flag. And we want to get, like you said earlier, those numbers on the low end. That's where we want the higher numbers on the right. We really don't want any numbers, but if we're going to have higher ones, probably on the right.
You want everything as far to the right as possible. The lower the overall ratings that you see in the metrics up at the top here, the better position your organization is in for limiting the impact of a breach. And when you have a high number in critical, it's usually a very common misconfiguration that we see at a lot of customers where I see domain users. You don't ever want to see domain users in Impact because that means that somebody has added that group to local admins on one of your endpoints. And that group is not supposed to grant admin privileges anywhere, but it happens. People do it, right? Sometimes it's because it's been nested inside of another group, which is the case here. We can see indicated by the direct control for the group being 0, but the indirect being 10. So it's nested inside some other group, and that is granting admin privileges on 10 endpoints. Now, this will usually cause a very interconnected graph, like in real customer production environments. It results in every user in the domain having a lateral movement path to every endpoint and every other user in the domain, especially if a higher privileged user has logged into any of the endpoints that this has been granted control over. So we can dive into the details beyond this, and this is one of our other recent updates to get a better understanding of what's happening here. So we see that domain users again has direct control of no endpoints. So here we see that it's nested in one group. That group doesn't give it control over any endpoints. So there's two layers of nesting going on here. This group is nested inside of another group, and that's where we get control over 10 endpoints. If we wanted to see exactly how that's occurring, again, we click the target icon down here, and here we go. Domain users is nested inside distribution group, and it's nested inside of Impact Emeryville admins. And this is the group that is granting control over this endpoint and actually all the endpoints.
That's fascinating. Yeah, so this is not a direct membership situation, but often in Active Directory, it's easy to lose because there's no UI in Microsoft Active Directory that shows you this nesting. So I would imagine what we've built here really is, well, number one, props, Josh, for envisioning this and patenting it and getting it built. Because wow, if I'm tasked with a project to clean up nested groups, this is the perfect tool to see the impact.
We look at our groups tab too, we can very quickly see where our nesting is going on, right? So this matches up at the top here. I can't quite get it all in frame with the window size, but you see our column shows us where exactly in our visualization up here it exists. We can even filter this too. So if I click on this, it's only going to show the results in that one column. One of the other things we did to make this easier, this is maybe not the best example, but we have these new quick filters up at the top. So sometimes you'll look at group memberships and they could have hundreds, even thousands of users in them. And when you have nesting going on, it's difficult to tell, which ones are direct members, which ones are indirect. I can do that very easily now by clicking these filters. In this case, none of them are direct. I switch the filter to indirect and I see, okay, there's group nesting going on here. And for groups, we can even look, actually, let's pop into the distribution group. We can look at our membership too. So that indirect direct control view was showing us where and how the groups grant admin privileges. In our members view, we've done a similar thing. Notice the direction of the arrows has changed. Now we're showing you how users in other groups are a member of this group. So we can see that 786 users are nest and no endpoints. If there were computer accounts that were a part of this group, we'd see an endpoint count. They're nested inside a group, and then that group is nested inside of this one. And in this case, it's going to be our domain users. So if we switch to, so our direct membership is domain users, which means that if we look at our users tab, all 768 of these users are indirect members because of that group nesting, right? Every user in the domain is a member of domain users by default. And as we saw in our groups tab, domain users is what is nested inside of the distribution group.
It slices, it dices, it does it all. This is great. Oh boy. Now, I just want to pause and empathize with our viewers for a second. I know at this point your head is probably spinning. because we're doing permutations of exponential, circles, concentric circles of impact. This user's nested into this group and that group and that group gets all these machines. And so this does take some time to think through it, but I promise you, take some time with the docs, watch this episode a couple times, and just it does make sense. There's just a lot of rings of impact here that we're illustrating. So, and if you're a more of a senior security analyst, I'm betting that you're high fiving your buddies right now, because this is just, yeah, it's great to have this kind of visualization. So, Josh, I'm conscious of our time getting away from us here. What else do you want to show us before we wrap up?
Sure. A couple things real quick. May have noticed in our details card here at the side, there's a bunch of different details. What it didn't show is depending on, if we're looking at a user group or an endpoint, you'll see some different types of data. But if I click on the detailed information here, we'll pop up some additional attributes from the object from Active Directory
Nice.
so that you don't have to go leave the product to find out more information. Because I know and
Oh
from
man.
working in large AD environments,
Uh huh.
you don't know what every single user group or computer is in the environment, but usually some attribute or property of that user group or computer will give you a clue. And here I can see, we got the description for the group, the distinguished name tells me where it's located in the directory, a bunch of other details that will give me clues to make informed decisions without having to leave the product and go look it up directly in AD.
That's so key because I was in so many environments where they had dozens of Active Directory domains, and if you properly wired in all those domains in here, you've got a lot of stuff to sort through, and it's like you don't even know where do I even begin to look for where this is located. But that distinguished name path is right there; it gives you everything you need to know.
Exactly. And I'll leave you with our last improvement, which is our asset search bar up at the top. This is everywhere across the product. You'll find it in the overview as well. So the findings view, we're trying to give you a good starting point. We have a default sorting order you can see indicated by the numbers here. That's going to bring up kind of your most risky assets up to the top. But if that doesn't work for you, you have the filters that we talked about earlier, so you can refine the results to show what's really important to you. And you can change the sorting here as well. You can click on any column or shift click to change a multi-sort. But if you know or have an idea of what you want to look at already, so I mentioned earlier, like you have an alert from an external system. The bar up at the top here, you can limit it to just users, just groups, or just endpoints, or look at everything. You can just start typing in the name of any one of those things. So let's say I wanted to look for you. I can just start typing in Ashley, and there you are. I see some details at a glance, and I can either just click on your name or on one of these to go to that specific view. But I don't have to mess around trying to find you down in the find.
Nice.
I can just go directly to you and quickly answer that question. Where can I go from here? So if I compromised your account, Ashley, I can very quickly see that means that I can uh, move laterally to one user and 10 endpoints and then see the details behind it there.
Man, I tell you, this is so key because we always talk about how Tanium really is the best platform for incident response. And we usually, threat response gets a lot of that attention. But when you come into impact here, I mean, I had a customer situation last year where there was one particular user account that was compromised, and they were looking at like process launches anywhere in the environment from that account. They knew that it was going to be malicious. But coming in here, then I could just search for that user account name and see all the machines where it was granted access directly or indirectly. I mean, this is for incident response. This is really a powerful tool.
Absolutely. It can really help you narrow your focus in an investigation like that. So, thinking back to what we were talking about earlier, showing the threat response integration, starting from that machine that had an alert, or in this case, starting from your user account, I know that the next likely point that could be reached is what's in the outbound hop one column here. So I can see that it's likely that you would be able to compromise these 10 endpoints. Or if we were looking at, we don't have it open here anymore. Yeah, this endpoint, right? So if we're looking at here, again, what is closest to it? And start my investigation there and work my way out. So, here we saw they can get to 97 different endpoints. Well, we know something happened here. The next closest are these 20. So I can click this, filter it down, look at my endpoint list, and now I could export this as well, right? So I have my list of where they were most likely to be able to go next. And I can narrow my focus and start here and really kind of accelerate my investigation process by not trying to do what you were just describing, right? Not trying to boil the ocean, not trying to look for it across everything in the environment. Let's focus on what's closest to it.
So, what does it take to get? For these changes that we're looking at now for the latest impact updates are already live in cloud.
We are.
If I'm an on-prem customer, I'm guessing that'll be the next. But depending on when you're watching this, in our 6-month semi-annual release,
Yes.
you'll be getting this on-prem, so that's good. Okay. You mentioned earlier, like, what are some of the frequently asked questions? Maybe some things where, in the configuration within Tanium, are there some common places people get things sideways in their configuration that causes issues?
It generally comes down to configuring the domains themselves, because really that's the only configuration that we have to do here. We don't chase referrals, so you can't use global catalog because global catalog does not have every attribute that we need for our analysis. So in a multi-domain environment, you do need to configure one connection per domain. And because of the certificate pinning, where we're trying to make sure that we trust that end to end, uh, don't support load balancing, right? So a lot of customers will try to configure through a load balancer. Doesn't work. It's not really a good thing to do anyways. Active Directory has its own high availability and redundancy built into it. So if you want some redundancy and impact, you can point or you can configure multiple connections to the same domain, just use different domain controllers. And as long as one of them is successful, you're good to go. So, here we have two different domain controllers configured. Um, if the first one fails, we'll still be able to pull the data we need from the second one. So that's kind of the most common thing, at least when it comes to setup and configuration.
Next question then is, what kind of customer success stories or feedback have you heard?
I have gotten a lot of really great feedback over the years. That example I used earlier when we were looking at the domain users being on um, having admin privileges on an endpoint. I so many times I've gotten on with customers and I've been giving them a walkthrough here, and we see this in their environment, and they were completely unaware, but they immediately recognize that's a problem. That shouldn't be there. And I've had customers go and fix that in the background on the call while I'm talking to them, and they'll come back in like a couple minutes later after we're still looking through stuff here and say, hey, I went and I fixed that. I removed domain users from this endpoint, so we're good to go there. And it's not always that, but it's usually very similar things. Like something will stand out to the customer as we're walking through this data in their environment, and they're able to very, very quickly remediate it and reduce the lateral movement risk that exists in their environment.
Now, I know prior to this recording, you shared with me a secret clip of something that's coming next. We're going to play that clip here for our viewers, but could you set that up and tell them what they're about to see?
Sure. So, what you're going to show in the clip is an upcoming feature that will allow you to terminate sessions for any variety of reasons on an endpoint. And that is based on both a new sensor that I'm going to show here, which will be in another new feature coming alongside this, where we're going to give you a lot more data about the sessions or the logins that exist on the endpoints under analysis across your environment here. So we're going to be able to show you things like the login ID, which is unique for machine. And this will allow you to do things like pivot over into uh, direct connection in threat response, or if you have investigate into the Windows event viewer there, and correlate events from the Windows security log based on the login ID that tie back to this specific session that exists on the endpoint. We'll also show you the authentication package. So here, all of these are Kerberos, but this can give you a clue like, hey, am I still having the less secure NTLM authentication happening all over the place? We'll show the domain, the session ID, and the session ID is what comes into play for that termination piece that you're going to show in that clip here.
All right, so I gotta pause for a second. You are saying that we will have a sensor that shows me anywhere somebody's used NTLM authentication across the entire environment?
Yeah.
Wow. Oh man. So I mean this goes back to the point about incident response tooling, right? This is the kind of stuff you need. And then so these are like active logon sessions, for example, in the environment as we're
Yeah.
talking.
So this is real time. So this was at the time that I asked the question. These are the sessions that existed on the endpoint. Now, these remain in memory until the endpoint is rebooted, for the most part. There are a few scenarios where they may be short-lived and don't show up here, but most sessions you'll see here. And we have a status column at the end telling you whether they're currently active or inactive. And then if they are inactive, you should also see a log off time. So we're going to show you when was the session created and when did it end. What domain controller did they authenticate against? What type of session is it? What login type? So these are all remote interactive and a couple of interactive in this environment here. The security identifier, the UPN, again, the domain that they logged into, the username, and then that session ID that I was starting to talk about earlier. So you can, with the session termination feature, we'll have an automate playbook and actually a step in automate as well.
Before you get over there, one second. So, I know you know this, just to make sure our new users who are watching this, new to security industry, this is why your users should shut down their machine every night. Unless you're in like a manufacturing environment, machines are 24/7 or healthcare, but like your users should be shutting down their machines every night to remove this stuff from memory because that's what these credential harvesters go for. They're looking for those credentials remnants in memory. So just a public service announcement, create a culture during your user education for security and make sure they're shutting down a machine every night. It'll save you a lot.
I'm glad you brought that up. I'm going to add a little bit of clarification there.
Okay.
And something that you will see in the status column here. Now, it's not present in this environment. So Microsoft actually made a change back in 2014. It used to be, so prior to 2014, if when you logged off, what you just said was true. The credentials would remain in memory in a way that they could be stolen even after log off. After 2014, starting with, I want to say like Windows 8 or 8.1, I can't remember. And they also backported it in as a patch in earlier legacy operating systems. But all modern operating systems work this way. The credentials are flushed immediately from log off. The session still exists, but it's an empty shell of a session, right? It just has the details that we see here. The credentials are no longer present in a way they can be stolen, unless you're on a legacy operating system and you don't have this patch, or if somebody has changed a specific registry key. If the registry key has been changed, it will revert back to the old behavior. And this sensor actually checks for that. The status
Oh.
will say leaking if that condition
Oh.
exists. So if you see leaking in the status column, and you see a log off time, that means that your credentials are still being exposed after log off in a way that they could be stolen.
And that's why you're the expert on the show, not me today. That's some wow, that's some really nice. I mean, this is what's fun about it. Usually we try to wrap these shows up in a half an hour, but we're getting into some really good stuff here that you just need to know if you're going to be working in this field. And I know we have a lot of people getting started who watch these shows. So there you go, folks. That's some free learning for you today.
There you go. So all of the data that you're seeing here is going to be used not only in the new session termination feature that you're going to see in the clip in just a moment, it will also be used to improve and enhance the experience for the session view inside of the Impact module. So you'll have a couple of different ways to access the session termination feature. You'll do it from within Impact in that session view, or through an automate playbook, which you'll see in the video clip. And then also at some point in the future, it'll be an action available through Threat Response in addition to our Threat Response Impact integration as well. So have a lot of flexibility for targeting users for session termination to immediately eliminate their access wherever it exists anywhere across your environment.
And that's why Tanium's the best incident response platform out there. So we're gonna move to a clip. Now I just want to remind everybody of what you just saw with that sensor. As of recording time of this show, that's not available yet. It's coming soon. And this clip we're about to show you is coming soon. Okay, we can't give you a date, but it's coming soon. So let's go watch this clip.
Today, I'm going to give you a sneak peek of an exciting new capability to terminate sessions on Windows endpoints for any user that exists in the environment. We're going to deliver this through an update of Tanium Impact, and it's going to include a playbook through the brand new Tanium Automate. Now, in the background here, I have a couple of different sessions that I've created on the same endpoint. We've got a remote desktop session for the user dev administrator. And then the user Josh in the lab domain has a run as, so we have run command prompt as that user inside of the same remote desktop session. And then in the background is a second remote desktop session to the same endpoint for the josh.m.bryant user in the dev domain. And you can see both of those in Task Manager here as well in the main session. Now, I want to be able to terminate the sessions of the Josh user and the Josh M. Bryant user without impacting anything that the administrator user is doing on the same endpoint. We don't want to disrupt their activity. We only want to stop the sessions that belong to these two users. To do that with the playbook, I'm going to first clone the playbook. And I'm going to give it a name. So we're going to terminate Josh here. Now we need to edit the second step in the playbook, the deploy action step. And here there are several different parameters that it accepts using the terminate sessions package. Each one of these is a list input that accepts one entry per line. So since I'm targeting multiple users here in a couple different domains, I'm going to use both the username and the domain field here. So we'll put in Josh, and then on a new line, Josh M. Bryant, and then we have the lab domain and the dev domain. Now you can combine any one of these fields. You can use just one by itself. Lots of flexibility in what can be done here. We can target based on just the security identifier, the fully qualified domain name or DNS domain name. We could log out any users in a specific domain by omitting the username, or we could just specify the username and leave the rest of these blank. Lots of different options for choosing how you target which user sessions we're going to terminate here. Now, in order for this to be successful, I also need to use the kill switch here. When the kill switch is selected, we will first attempt to gracefully log off any session where possible. And when that doesn't work, we'll fall back to forcefully terminating the session. In the case of sessions that have been created by doing a run as, such as the one for the user Josh here, the only way that we can terminate that session is using the kill switch, because when you do a run as, it'll share the same session ID as system, which is session ID 0, and we cannot log off session ID 0. We have to terminate processes that belong to that specific user within that session ID to make sure that we're targeting only the sessions that we want to terminate here. Now, after doing this, all I need to do is click Apply, and then we'll click Create, And this has made a new copy of the playbook for me to run. Now I'm going to go ahead and click Start. Now this playbook does include a manual step that I will have to acknowledge before it progresses. So we'll go into the playbook run, and we can see here it says requires user confirmation. So I'll expand this, and we have some manual instructions that have been provided. Now for this to be effective, especially in a malicious user or insider threat scenario, for example, we need to make sure that the account was disabled in either Active Directory or Enter ID, depending on where it lives, prior to running the playbook. If we don't do this, the user will be able to just reestablish their session. They'll be able to log right back in and continue unauthorized access. If the account is disabled first, their account is limited as soon as it's disabled. However, any active session will not be limited until the authentication token is reevaluated. So when it tries to establish a new connection to another resource or when reauthentication has to occur. So there's a period of time that exists where an active session can still access resources, especially on the local machine, even after their account's been disabled. To force things along and prevent further unauthorized access, we'll run this playbook after disabling them to log them out immediately. So you'll notice that as soon as I click Mark Complete here and it moves on to the next step of the playbook, we're going to watch these sessions in the background terminate. There we go. I've clicked on it. And we see the one and then the other just terminated. So the first, we had the session on the left side, the run as, ended immediately. And if I pull this up, we can see that the remote desktop session for the one in the background has ended as well. So very, very quickly, we were able to accomplish our goals here.
All right. So now you just saw in Automate session termination, right? That's an incident response situation, right? You know this account's been compromised in your environment. You just need to go find it and kill it. There you go. You're welcome. All right, Josh. Wow. From your intro, I was impressed right at up the front, right? You are the guy who created this. You've got the patent. This is amazing technology. So now we've kind of wrapped up. Anything else you want to make sure people take away today?
A lot of customers have this and actually don't realize that they already have it. Go take a look in your environment, make sure it's configured, because you're going to get a lot of value out of it, I guarantee. I have not had a single customer tell me that they didn't get something out of the product. So take a look, see if you have it, configure it. If you don't, talk to your account team. They'll be happy to set you up with a demo or get you a proof of concept so you can run it and see what it looks like in your environment. And I think you'll really like it. So Ashley, thanks for having me on again. It's like you said, it's been long over to do this. It's been really fun finally getting on here and talking about Impact.
Well, Josh, this has been fun catching up, talking about the good old days and seeing just how amazing this capability is. Again, I've said it many times. It's going to be a big help in your incident response and also proactively preventing incident response, right? Getting in there, doing that hygiene of those computer groups and user groups. Please go clean that stuff up, folks. This is your public service announcement. So in the show notes below is a link to the docs. And as always, you can got the Tanium help.tanium.com, the Tanium Resource Center. You can go out there to the community, interact with other users, ask questions. Hey, what are you doing with Impact? This is how it's helped us, right? And have those conversations out there in our Tanium community. We'd love to interact with you there. So until next time, go Tanium.